be, as we come to the end of the session, if each one of you was advising the CISO of a large enterprise on how to prepare for cybersecurity threats a decade from now, what would be your recommendations? Top 2, top 3 recommendations of what does cybersecurity look like 10 years from now? Let's start with you, Aarti.
I would actually echo the theme of this panel, which is you think you don't have control over your data today, wait till 10 years from now, where there will be too much of it and so much of it that what control you have now is also not going to be there. So you actually have to devise your data structures to be self-protecting. And so think about inserting all of your data protection into the data itself and start that now, because it will be difficult to do it later. And of course, I'm from the world of encryption, so I would say figure out how to encrypt your data in use. You got to do that, because no one's stealing disks, physical media from data centers anymore. They're coming in with credentials. So
that's true.
That would be my take. Yeah.
All right, Kevin.
Good. I figured Jim was going to steal all mine, so I'm glad you picked me next. Just a couple things. So first of all, you should have proportionate protection based on the value of your data. You don't want to spend the same amount of money to protect, like I said, the lunch menu versus a tax return. And as this whole panel has said, limited resources across the board, both in terms of people and in terms of money. So focus your security efforts around the most valuable things that you need to go ahead and protect, whether it be on the structured side, unstructured side, but get that right. And in that same picture, which we see every single day, tech debt will leave you vulnerable. And I get phone calls regularly saying, Kevin, can you scan this tandem mainframe? No, get rid of that. It shouldn't still be there. And we shouldn't have data in that, but they have all this stuff they've inherited 15, 20 years ago that's going to leave them incredibly vulnerable to anybody that wants to get in to get credentials, to Artie's point, that they're not going to be able to put modern security controls around. So get rid of your tech debt. And then the last one that it's probably on all of our websites someplace. It's not a matter of if you'll be breached, it's when. That's no longer the paradigm. It's how often. Yeah. And when you have to think about how often am I going to get breached, it changes how you're going to react to them, and it changes how you're going to manage for them. It's not this black swan event that's going to happen once every 15 years or in a lifetime. It's going to happen maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, depending on what business you're in. It could happen once a month. So how do you treat that in a very different fashion than how we've done it historically, which is nobody's going to get in, so I should be okay. And on a really rare occasion that maybe they do, I'll deal with attorneys and my cyber insurance. It is now a how often conversation, and they got to prepare for that.
Well said. Couldn't agree more, Kevin. Jim?
Yeah, look, I think number one, there's a lot of noise out there for CISOs that they have to deal with, right? You've got, as we talked about earlier, you've got the external regulation and compliance and different industry standards that is coming at them all the time. You've got the board of directors worried about what Kevin just talked about, how often they're being breached and what they're doing about the privacy issues. And then you've got over 3,000 cybersecurity startups out there because there's so much money in this industry, throwing lots of noise at them, right? And everyone's saying that they're the right solution. I think the best advice that I could try to give to the CISO to prepare for what is going to just continually get harder is to look at NIST, look at zero trust, look at the steps that they should take, and don't do it as I'm doing this because it's my job and I'm going to just satisfy a compliance or a requirement. Do it as if though you're passionate and this is your product, because it's really what has become, right? That this cybersecurity needs to become part of the fabric every day of the company, and it shouldn't just be the CISO's duty. So the more that it's ingrained in all of the personnel inside the company, and there's buy-in from the entire company that the things that they're doing around data protection, which is where it starts, are necessary in order to keep the company viable. Otherwise, it's just how bad is the breach going to be, right? Or when is the one that's going to actually impact them financially or cripple the company?
Very well said, Jim. And I'll add on to this. I think the biggest challenge in enterprises today that we see is this significant security demand supply gap on skill sets, right? So every security team in every enterprise has 10 times more work than they can possibly do, right? And this debt that is building up, the security debt, right, as parallel to the tech debt, there is a security debt that is building up every day, right? Because work that is required today and it's not done because there are no skills and so on. is piling up and it's becoming worse tomorrow, right? So one of the first things that I would tell the CISO of today is start worrying about skilling and training the resources that you have. That's one, and create and invest enough, because it's like every software company wants to get a 5 years experienced engineer, and nobody wants to deal with the first 5 years of the engineer, right? That's somebody else's problem, and that's the exact same phenomena that we are seeing much worse in the security world. And correlated to that is I would advise to start investing and start getting used to dealing with higher and higher levels of automation, right? So any technology that requires security professionals to come in and manage the technology or deploy the technology or do anything to do with the technology is going to become the bad apple very quickly. And it doesn't matter, it almost doesn't matter how valuable the technology or the value that it is delivering and how well it is supporting your digital transformation projects. If it requires an army of people to deploy or manage, that's a bad idea, and it's going to become worse as the skill gap becomes worse in the security industry. And the third for me would be maybe the logical next step would be to start looking at more and more machine learning kind of algorithms to come and take in instead of hiring or deploying more and more resources on a particular, so automation in general, right? Because there is a significant skill gap, security professionals, from compensation to skill level to everything is becoming worse for the CISO today than it was yesterday, and it'll become worse tomorrow and much worse 10 years from now. The only option here is to invest more and more into methods of automation which require the need for having this kind of large teams of security professionals hired within the company, because it almost doesn't matter, right? Whether you're trying to hire or you're trying to get contractors or third parties or whatever, the world is running short of security professionals by an order of magnitude, right? Which is probably great news for the security professionals out there, but not so good news for the to the CISOs and the companies who are hiring.
Yeah, truth.
Right. Hey, thanks a lot, everyone. Thanks a lot, Kevin, Aarti, Jim, for coming and spending time. This has been a very engaging panel. I don't know if you can see, but there's a halo right here already forming behind my head. So I really appreciate your time, and I think the audience here, which is security professionals from all around the world, will be truly appreciative. And for everybody here who's listening in, I think all the companies that you see here represented are excellent companies. They're leaders in the space, and if anything that Jim, Kevin, Aarti, or I have said sounds interesting, you should look at some of the sessions that have already happened. We'll send you the recordings, and feel free to participate in the forthcoming sessions. Thank you, everyone.